Where did you get that car?
It's mine.
You shouldn't have that.
We can call the cops. That's your choice.
Call the cops.
That's your choice.
Explain yourself.
Right, yes.
James Cooper stood behind his black SUV in the supermarket parking lot, carefully lifting grocery bags from the cart. Bread, milk, apples, cereal. Just normal groceries. He wore a simple brown shirt and black jeans. Nothing flashy, nothing suspicious. He had just finished a long day and wanted to get home. That was all. Then, footsteps approached from behind. A woman's voice cut sharply through the quiet afternoon. "Excuse me?" James turned. A white couple, a man and a woman, were standing a few feet away. The woman crossed her arms, her gaze sharp. The man tilted his head, staring at James like he had just seen something impossible. "Do you own that SUV?" the woman asked, pointing at the black vehicle. James blinked. "Yes. Why?" The man scoffed. "Where did you get it from? That's not the kind of car you can just have." James frowned. "It's from a dealership. I bought it." The woman laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Yeah, right," she said. "Someone like you doesn't deserve a car like that. You probably stole it." James's hands rested lightly on the trunk. "I work for the government," he said calmly. "I can afford what I buy." The couple exchanged a look, unconvinced. "We don't believe you," the woman said. She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police." Before the story moves forward, I want to ask you, where are you watching this from? Drop it in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about truth, justice, and shocking reveals, make sure to like, subscribe, hype this up, and share it with someone who will love it. James Cooper nodded slightly. "Go ahead." The woman dialed quickly. Her voice carried. "Yes, hello? There's a suspicious man here. We think he stole a black SUV." James closed the trunk and leaned against the car, calm and composed. People nearby began whispering. Some glanced over, curious. A kid tugged his mother's sleeve. Someone recorded on their phone. Minutes later, 2 patrol cars rolled into the lot. Lights flashed, but no sirens. 2 uniformed officers stepped out. "What's happening here?" one officer asked, his hand resting near his belt. "That man stole this SUV," the woman said, pointing at James. "We saw him trying to load it like it was his." James stood tall, hands visible, calm as ever. "Sir," one officer asked, "is this your vehicle?" "Yes," James replied. "Do you have proof?" "Of course," James said, reaching for his wallet. The officer squinted, studying James's face. Something felt familiar, though he couldn't place it. "You're new in town?" he asked, cautiously. "Yes," James replied, simply. The second officer spoke quietly to his partner. "Something's off." The white couple smiled, confident. They had the cops on their side, or so they thought. "Sir, would you come to the station so we can clear this up?" the officer asked. James nodded. "Sure, no problem." The couple smirked. "See, we're doing the right thing," Linda said. The officers escorted James Cooper to the patrol car. He wasn't handcuffed. He didn't resist. He just walked. As the patrol car drove off, the white couple waved, smug smiles still on their faces. They had no idea what was coming. Inside the car, James remained silent, calm, and in control. Outside, the town had no clue that the man they assumed was a suspect was about to turn their world upside down. The day that had started with an ordinary trip to the supermarket was about to become unforgettable. The patrol car rolled slowly through the quiet streets. James Cooper sat in the back, hands resting lightly on his knees. He looked out the window, watching people going about their normal day. Kids ran to catch the school bus. A man walked a dog. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening. The two officers in the front spoke little, glancing in the rearview mirror more than necessary. One of them finally broke the silence. "You said you're new in town," he asked cautiously. "Yes," he replied calmly. "When did you arrive?" "Last week," he said. The officer nodded, unsure what to say next. He tried to act normal, but something about James's quiet confidence made him uneasy. The car turned into the parking lot of the local police station, a brick building with glass doors and a flag waving outside. Nothing special. But the second the car stopped, James noticed heads turning. Officers paused mid-step. Phones buzzed. Whispers floated through the station. A young officer behind the front desk looked up and froze. His eyes widened. He couldn't speak. "Sir?" the young officer finally whispered. James nodded slightly. "Good afternoon." The young officer stumbled back, almost tripping over his chair. Chief?" he asked, his voice shaking. James Cooper gave a small nod. "Yes." At that moment, the middle-aged captain walked out, coffee in hand. He froze, staring at James. The cup slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. "Oh no," he whispered. James sighed softly. "I was hoping to keep a low profile." The captain swallowed hard. "Sir, we had no idea you were arriving today." James raised an eyebrow. "I wanted to see how things really work here." The officers in the room whispered to each other. Some shook their heads. Others looked embarrassed.
The two patrol officers who had brought James in stood frozen, realizing the mistake they had almost made. You're the new police chief?" one of them asked, disbelief in his voice. "Yes," James said calmly. "James Cooper." The room went silent. You could hear the clock ticking on the wall. The captain cleared his throat. "Sir, what should we do about the people who called the police?" James didn't raise his voice. He didn't frown. He simply said, "Bring them in. They filed a false report and harassed me." The officers scrambled. Phones rang. Calls were made. The supermarket parking lot was buzzing by now. The couple, Linda and Mark Miller, were still standing there, proud of themselves, completely unaware of what was about to happen. When the patrol cars arrived again, the couple's smiles faltered. James stepped out first, calm and composed. He didn't need handcuffs. He didn't need shouting. He just stood there. The officers walked past James and went straight to Linda and Mark. "Ma'am, you are under arrest," one officer said firmly. "What?" Linda screamed. "Why?" "For filing a false police report and harassment," the officer replied. Mark's face turned pale. "This is a mistake," he stammered. James Cooper took a step forward. His voice was soft, but it carried. "No, this is truth. You accused me without cause. You judged me before knowing me. That ends today." The couple's faces turned from smug to shocked. They were handcuffed and escorted to the patrol car, still protesting, still arguing, but no one listened. The crowd that had gathered watched silently. Whispers spread. Phones recorded every second. The man and woman who thought they had justice in their hands were being led away. James Cooper picked up a fallen grocery bag from the lot, placed it gently in his SUV, and closed the trunk. Calm, collected, and in complete control. This day had started with groceries and accusations. Now it would end with justice, quiet, firm, and undeniable. The police station felt heavy as Linda and Mark Miller were escorted inside. The usual noise, phones ringing, officers talking, seemed to fade. The couple walked with smug confidence at first, but every step made their faces paler. Inside the hallway, the metallic clang of the cell doors echoed with a sense of finality. The woman shouted as she was led forward. "You can't do this! We didn't do anything wrong!" An officer stopped and looked at her calmly. "You filed a false police report. You accused an innocent man. That's harassment." Mark's hands shook. "We were just being careful," he repeated, almost pleading. James Cooper stood nearby, observing quietly. calm, collected, unshaken. His brown eyes scanned the couple with a clarity that made their confidence falter. "Careful?" James asked softly, but every word carried weight. "You didn't ask for proof. You didn't wait for facts. You judged me the moment you saw me." Linda's face twisted in anger. "You tricked us," she spat. James shook his head slowly. "No, I told you the truth. You chose not to believe it." The couple's smugness was gone now. The officer opened the first cell door. "Step inside," he ordered. Linda hesitated. "Please, we can just go home, right?" James's voice was calm, firm. "You tried to ruin my life today. You could have endangered me or worse. This is accountability." The cell door slammed behind them. The sound reverberated down the empty hallway. Inside the small holding cell, Linda collapsed onto the bench, exhausted. Tears ran freely down her face. Mark paced back and forth, gripping the bars. "This is your fault," Mark whispered. "No, it's his fault," Linda snapped. Outside, James Cooper turned back to the officers. "Make sure everything is done by the book. No shortcuts, no exceptions." "Yes, sir," the captain replied, voice trembling slightly. As the day progressed, more of the truth came out. Officers reviewed past calls made by the Millers. A pattern appeared: false accusations, harassment, and judgment without proof. 4 past incidents had gone unnoticed. James nodded thoughtfully. "That ends today." By mid-afternoon, news of the arrest had spread. Crowds gathered outside the station, whispers filling the air. People were curious, some angry, some relieved, some shocked. Everyone had an opinion. A reporter approached James. "Do you think race played a role in this?" she asked. James paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think fear did. Fear makes people do ugly things. It's not always conscious, but it's real." Inside the holding cell, Linda and Mark listened to the murmurs outside. "They're talking about us," Linda said, panic creeping back into her voice. Mark remained silent, staring at the wall. "We should have stayed out of it," he muttered. As the hours passed, officers finalized paperwork, statements, and video evidence from the parking lot. Every frame confirmed the truth. The accusations were false. When officers returned to the cell, they delivered the final verdict. "You will be charged with filing a false report and harassment. Court date will be set." Linda screamed. Mark closed his eyes, silent for the first time. James Cooper watched from a distance. No anger, no revenge, just calm and steady justice. Later that evening, James sat alone in his office. A framed photo of his parents, his father in uniform, his mother smiling beside him, stood on his desk. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "I won't let this place stay broken." Outside, the lights of the station dimmed, and for the first time that day, Linda and Mark understood something simple, bitter, and undeniable. They were not the victims. By the next morning, the story had spread like wildfire. People talked about it everywhere. Coffee shops buzzed with whispers. Kids heard their parents discussing it at breakfast. Phones lit up with videos from the supermarket parking lot, the accusations, the police arriving, and then the shocking return of James Cooper, calm, confident, and in control. At the police station, reporters were waiting with cameras, microphones, and notebooks. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted a statement. Everyone wanted drama. James Cooper arrived early, wearing his usual brown shirt and black jeans. No show of authority, just calm and steady presence. Officers watched him closely. Some were proud, some nervous. A few even looked ashamed. James gathered everyone in the briefing room. "This isn't about me," he said firmly. "It's about how we treat people when we think no one's watching." The room stayed quiet. "You wear this badge to protect truth, not feelings, not assumptions, truth. And when you fail to do that, people get hurt." Heads nodded silently. Officers scribbled notes. Outside, a woman in the crowd shouted, "We stand with you, Chief." More voices joined in. People who had once whispered now spoke loudly, showing support for honesty and accountability. A reporter approached James. "Do you think race played a role in the Millers' accusations?" she asked. James paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think fear did. Fear makes people do ugly things. It's not always conscious, but it's real." Inside the holding cell, Linda and Mark listened to the murmurs outside.
"They're talking about us," Linda said, panic creeping back into her voice. Mark remained silent, staring at the wall. "We should have stayed out of it," he muttered. As news kept spreading, officers reviewed old complaints filed by the Millers. A clear pattern emerged: false accusations, harassment, and judgment without proof. 4 past incidents had gone unnoticed. "This town has waited a long time for someone like you," an older man said as he shook James's hand, a shop owner who had once witnessed a false claim firsthand.
James smiled gently. "I'm just doing my job." Later that afternoon, James returned to the supermarket parking lot alone. No reporters, no crowd, just cars, lights, and the quiet rhythm of ordinary life. A young boy walked past with his mother. He pointed. "Mom, that's the police chief." James knelt down to meet the child's eyes. "Hey there," he said kindly. The boy asked, "Why were people mean to you?" James answered softly, "Because they were scared of what they didn't understand." The boy nodded seriously, as if that explained everything. Back at the station, the Millers were moved to a quieter cell. Linda's face was pale. Mark stared at the wall, silent. "I never thought this would happen," Linda admitted. Mark finally spoke. "We thought we were right." Silence filled the cell. Later, James approved formal charges: false police report, harassment, and disorderly conduct. No anger, no vengeance, just facts. The town began to notice. Conversations changed. Schools invited officers to speak. Shops put up flyers about honesty and civic responsibility. Fear slowly shifted to respect. That evening, candles lit the town square. People didn't protest, they reflected. They remembered the story, the lesson, and the man who had stayed calm through it all, James Cooper. James stood at the edge, watching the glow of the lights. "This is just the beginning," he whispered to himself. The town had changed, whether they liked it or not. And Linda and Mark Miller, locked in their cell that night, understood it more clearly than anyone. This was a turning point. They were no longer in control. Truth was. Legal consequences hit. The Millers face the court, and accountability becomes real. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. The room was quiet in a heavy way. Every step echoed. Every cough sounded loud. Linda and Mark Miller sat at the defense table, side by side but not touching. Linda twisted a tissue in her hands. Mark stared straight ahead, jaw tight, lips pressed together. Their earlier confidence had completely vanished. James Cooper entered quietly. No uniform, just his brown shirt and black jeans. He didn't need drama, he didn't need cameras, he only wanted truth. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Linda's hands trembled slightly. Mark didn't move. As the case began, the video from the supermarket played. Every second was captured: the accusations, the police arriving, and James calmly standing there while the Millers demanded justice that wasn't theirs to claim. "You don't deserve a car like this," Linda's voice echoed through the courtroom from the footage. The courtroom stayed silent. The judge paused the video. "This court takes false accusations seriously," he said, looking over his glasses. The defense lawyer stood. "My clients were afraid. They made a mistake," he said, trying to explain. The judge's eyes were sharp. Fear does not excuse harm. James listened quietly, steady and calm, as witnesses spoke: a store worker, a shopper, 2 officers who had responded. Every story confirmed the same truth. When it was James's turn to speak, he stood slowly. His voice was soft, steady, but carried across the room. "I don't want revenge," he said. "I want accountability. You cannot accuse someone falsely and expect life to continue as normal." The courtroom remained silent. The Millers could not respond. Every word pierced in its own quiet way. After a short pause, the judge delivered the verdict. "This court finds the defendants, Linda and Mark Miller, guilty of filing a false police report and harassment." Linda gasped. Mark's eyes widened, then dropped to the floor. The judge continued, "Sentences will include fines, mandatory community service, and a public apology. Any repeat offense will result in jail time."
Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed, microphones pointed toward James Cooper. "I don't want justice to shout," James said quietly to the crowd. "It should teach. It should change behavior. And it has." The Millers were taken home after posting bail. Their house felt smaller. Neighbors stared, whispered. Judgment hung in the air. Inside, Linda cried softly. "Everyone hates us now," she said. Mark remained silent. "We earned this," he said quietly. Across town, James Cooper returned to the station. He met with officers and reviewed policies. Training programs were updated. Rules were rewritten. "No assumptions," he told them. "Only facts. No personal bias. No fear-driven judgment." Weeks passed. The Millers served their community service at a local shelter. They scrubbed floors, washed dishes, and faced the people they had judged unfairly. At first, they kept their heads down, silent and embarrassed. But slowly, humility began to sink in. One day, Linda met the eyes of a volunteer who smiled warmly at her. It shook her. Mark noticed small gestures of kindness from the people they had wronged. That night, Mark whispered, "I think we were wrong about a lot of things." Linda nodded. "Me too." Meanwhile, James Cooper continued his work quietly. He ensured the town would remember the lesson not just in words, but in action. One afternoon, as he parked his SUV at the supermarket, he stepped out and looked at the lot. It felt different now. No fear, no false accusations. Life moved on, guided by truth and fairness. Consequences had done their work, quiet, firm, and clear. The shelter smelled faintly of soap, warm food, and wood polish. Linda and Mark Miller arrived early, tired faces and plain clothes. No cameras, no one treated them special. They were here to serve their sentence, but quietly they began to notice something else. The work was hard, scrubbing floors, washing dishes, carrying boxes of supplies. At first, Linda kept her head down. Mark moved mechanically, staring straight ahead. Their pride had vanished, their anger too.
Days passed like this. Slowly, the couple began to see the world differently. One afternoon, Linda paused while wiping tables. "I keep hearing his voice," she whispered. "Who?" Mark asked, stacking canned goods. "The police chief," she said softly. "When he told us we judged him before knowing him." Mark nodded slowly. "Because we did," he admitted. Silence followed. The shelter's regular visitors told stories. People who worked 2 jobs, families living in tiny apartments, people who smiled even when everything felt impossible. Linda and Mark listened. At first, they resisted. Then, slowly, humility sank in. Linda started helping without being asked. She smiled, cautiously. Mark began to greet people politely. Small acts, but they mattered. One afternoon, James Cooper visited the shelter. No cameras, no uniform, just a quiet man walking into the room. The shelter fell silent. Linda froze. Mark stiffened. James nodded politely to the staff and volunteers, thanking them for their hard work. Then his gaze fell on the Millers. He didn't scold them. He didn't lecture. He only looked at them clearly, calmly, without judgment. After a pause, Linda gathered courage. "Sir," she whispered. James turned. "Yes." "I'm sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "Not because we got caught, not for punishment, but because we were wrong, truly wrong." James studied her face. "Apologies matter most when they come with change," he said. Linda nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. Mark looked down, quietly accepting the weight of his own mistakes. Later, the couple walked home together. The streets were quiet. The lights from the street lamps cast long shadows, but they felt lighter somehow. "I don't want to be that person anymore," Linda said, softly. "Me neither," Mark agreed. Across town, James Cooper sat in his office reviewing notes and planning training sessions for officers. Policies would change, practices would change, the town would change, not because of punishment alone, but because people had seen truth act without anger. Even the community began to notice.
Conversations shifted. People stopped assuming. Children asked questions. Adults reflected. The story of James Cooper and the Millers became a lesson in humility, accountability, and fairness. At the shelter, Linda laughed for the first time in weeks. Mark held a door open for a visitor. Small gestures, but meaningful. They were learning slowly that their actions had consequences beyond themselves. James watched from a distance as the town quietly healed. He didn't need recognition. He only needed honesty and integrity to guide the people around him. "This is how it starts," he whispered to himself as he looked out the window, seeing the lights of the town glint in the evening sun. The Millers had begun to understand, slowly and painfully, that accountability didn't humiliate, it taught. Silence, reflection, and small acts of humility were more powerful than any punishment. The town was listening now, and change had begun. The last day of community service at the shelter came quietly. No cameras, no reporters, just Linda and Mark Miller finishing their tasks with slow, careful movements, scrubbing floors, serving meals, organizing supplies. Their heads were low, their steps measured. The pride and anger they once carried were gone. Linda finished wiping the last table and stood back. "That's it," she said softly. Her voice trembled, but there was calm beneath it. Mark nodded. "Feels different than the first day." They looked around the shelter. People smiled at them politely. Some waved. For the first time, they felt the weight of their actions, not just the punishment, but the understanding of the hurt they caused. Across town, James Cooper walked into the station. He didn't wear a uniform, just his usual brown shirt and black jeans. He didn't need recognition. He only needed the town to remember the lesson. "Your job," he told the new officers, "is to protect truth. Not assumptions, not fear. Truth." The officers nodded, understanding that real justice required calm, observation, and patience. Later that afternoon, James returned to the supermarket parking lot, the place where it had all begun. The lot was calm. Cars parked normally. People moved about quietly, unaware of the lesson that had already reshaped the town. He stepped out of his SUV, closed the trunk, and looked at the lot. No fear, no whispering, no accusations, just ordinary life. Meanwhile, Linda and Mark had written their public apology as required by the court. Every word was honest. "We judged without knowing. We accused without proof. We were wrong." The apology was read at a town meeting that evening. Some residents nodded, some remained silent, some whispered quietly among themselves, but everyone listened. James stood as the reading ended. "Justice doesn't need to shout," he said softly. "It teaches, it guides, and it lasts when it is calm, consistent, and fair." The Millers didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their actions, their service, and their apology spoke louder than words. Days passed, weeks passed. The story faded from the headlines, but not from the minds of the town. People remembered what had happened, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. James continued his work quietly. Officers trained properly. Community programs began. Conversations about fairness, truth, and assumptions spread. The town began to shift, slowly, one person at a time. One evening, James parked his SUV near the supermarket. A child ran past with a parent. The child pointed. "Mom, that's the police chief." James smiled faintly. He nodded at the child and stepped into the car. Calm, quiet, steady. He loaded his groceries, closed the trunk, and drove home. The town had seen justice, real justice, calm, firm, clear, and it didn't need handcuffs, yelling, or chaos to make itself known. Linda and Mark Miller, sitting quietly in their home that night, finally understood the truth. Their accusations had consequences, their false assumptions were corrected, and through humility, reflection, and accountability, they had learned something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. James Cooper, walking into his house, reflected quietly. Justice, he thought, was not about power. It was about truth, calm, and patience, and when it worked, it changed lives quietly, permanently, and completely. The town had learned. Linda and Mark had learned, and James Cooper, He simply kept doing his job, quietly, steadily, and without fanfare, because justice had no need for applause. It had already arrived.